In order to remember and retain a message, the message actually is going to travel through 3 memory systems. The first is your immediate memory system, which is just a few seconds long, and most of what actually passes through our immediate memory system is lost. For example, you probably don't remember shoes that someone was wearing earlier today. Even though you saw them, you probably don't recall it because it passed in and out of your immediate memory very quickly. After your immediate memory system, then you move into short-term memory, and if you don't engage in rehearsal and clustering and identifying patterns and information during the short-term memory stage, then it's very difficult to transition that information into your long-term memory stage. It's interesting to note that your immediate and your short-term memory have limited capacity, yet your long-term memory doesn't have limited capacity. So it's like this endless warehouse that you can store information in. But the key is actually storing it in a way that you can retrieve the information, right? So that way when you don't get test time and you sit down and take the test, you're like, I know I studied this, but I can't remember the answer. And it's because you don't have an effective association with what you stored in your memory in order to be able to retrieve it very quickly. Now, the more developed your cognitive schemata, that is, the more developed your information and how you categorize information in your head, the easier it is to transfer information into your long-term memory. So that is, the more you know, actually, the easier it is to learn new things. And some people say, oh, I just have brain freeze because I'm fried. I've learned too much lately. Well, actually, the more you know, it's going to help you to learn new things because you have a greater degree of understanding and you have more information, you have more schemata in your head. You can liken cognitive schemata to a filing system. And the more files you have, the more places you have to put information, right? So the more filing cabinets, the more drawers, the more files, the better off you are. So that's sort of an encouragement to continue learning. It can be challenging to recall information that you don't understand. And so if you're going to transition from understanding and interpretation into remembering and retaining information, then you need to make sure that you don't skip any steps, right? So you need to understand the information first. There are a number of easy ways that we can improve our memory. Repetition is one great way to do this. We rehearse information by repeating ideas over and over again, chunking information and ideas into easy ways to remember them. For example, you might take under remembering and retaining all these bullets, and you could create an acronym for them, and that's actually creating a mnemonic, which is a memory technique. And you could use word pictures where maybe you animate different words and you make them even into a song or a pattern or a rhythm. And then a final way that's really easy to improve your memory is to just take notes. That is to fill in the blanks, so to speak. And there are a variety of ways to improve note-taking skills, and there are formats for note-taking. Outlining is probably one of the most common, but there are a variety of other ways. If you want more information on that, I can provide you with that. I teach a listening behavior course in which I actually teach a variety of types of note-taking. So if you'd like to know more about that, I'd be happy to provide you with that information. As we're moving through the process of listening, we move then to critical evaluation. That is judging what we've understood and interpreted in order to determine how truthful, authentic, believable you really judge the meaning to be. In order to do this effectively, it's advocated that you try to separate fact from inferences. Some books actually break it down into fact, inference, and opinion, because facts can be verifiably accounted for. That is, you can look up the information, you can verify it. There is a truth or a falsehood about it. However, many things that we're evaluating in terms of messages are inferences. That is, they're claims or assertions based on facts, but they're not facts themselves. Opinions usually go one step further from facts and inferences, and they're even, I guess, a further degree away from being a fact. Ways that you can improve critical evaluation is you can probe for more information about the credibility of messages, try to figure out what the other person, what they're saying, where those ideas come from, what supports those ideas, what arguments they're using to support their ideas. We could go into studying, when we look at critical evaluation, into studying argumentation, fallacies in reasoning, and types of reasoning. We're not going to do that right now because we're going to talk about that at a later time in this class when we look at interpersonal power and influence and how we can be persuasive. But you can judge the accuracy to a certain degree of other people's information, and you can judge whether or not they're conveying a fact or an inference to you in order to evaluate that information. Before we move on to support and comfort, I do want to say something about responding. It is normally what we would label as the last stage in the listening process, and responding to the other individual is important. I think it's important, especially in empathic listening context, that is in our responses actually having and showing support and empathy and care, and that we're listening. How do you know another person's listening to you? How can you gauge whether or not they're really focused on what you're saying? What is it that they're doing that in their response is demonstrating their listening skills? Well, it's probably a number of things. It's probably the way they're making eye contact with you, the way they pick up on certain things that you say and they repeat them back in their responses. It is most likely their posture, the way that they're orienting themselves toward you. It's also in the phrases that they use. I mean, there's a variety of things that would make a response more effective. And responding is a part of the listening process. And the reason that we normally don't talk about it in the listening chapter is because you become a speaker, so to speak, again. But if we label ourselves just as communicator, then I think that we can once again take back the value of responding to the listening process and understand that as listeners, we're not these listless objects that just sit there and take in a message. That at a certain point, it comes time for us to respond back to the other person, to provide feedback, to engage in a more of a dyadic interchange between two people. It's especially important when we're talking about support and comforting another person, because if you're going to show empathy or even sympathy, a lesser degree of empathy to the other person, then you have to respond back to them. So next we're going to be looking at how we demonstrate to others our shows of comfort and support and caring. And we're going to look at some of the differences between empathy and sympathy and how both of those emotions can be communicated within our interpersonal context.